Okay, we're going to talk about the next section, which is 1-4. So if you guys can take on some notes, let's get started here. We're going to talk about equations, inequalities, and some math modeling in terms of quadratics. So we're going to solve quadratic equations by some different methods. We're going to solve by factoring, by doing the square root of both sides, and by completing the square. We'll also use the quadratic formula, and we'll apply it to hopefully some real-life situations. All right, so these are equations that you guys have solved before. First up, let's do the easiest thing, which is to solve by factoring. So to solve by factoring, we would subtract 3 from both sides. We get 2x squared plus 9x plus 10 equals 0. And we would factor that. Okay. Now, you can factor this by guess and check. That'd probably be the easiest. Put 2x and x here. Now, what is it? Oops, I'm sorry. 7 minus 3 is 4. So the question is, what two numbers multiplied before? So I'm going to try different things. I'm going to try 3 and 1 and see if that gives me the middle term of 9x. So let me multiply it. It gives you 2x in the middle and 3x, which you know is 5, so that would work. Let's try 1 and 3. I'm sorry, 1 and 4. Not 1 and 3. 2x times 4 is 8x, and so that does work. 8x and 9x give you, or 8x and 1x give you 9x. So guess and check works fine to factor this. And then from here, you can see that the solutions come from when these factors are 0, because 0 times anything is 0. So set the first factor equal to 0, and subtract 1, and divide both sides by 2, you get x equals negative 1/2. So x equals negative 1/2 is a solution, as well as negative 4. Those are the two solutions. Now, if you want to see how to factor this by grouping, for example, if you remember factor by grouping, what we did to factor by grouping is we said, okay, multiply the first and last together gives you 8x squared. Now break that into two things that multiply to be 8x squared and add together to be 9x. So that obviously be 8x and 1x. They multiply together to give 8x squared, but add together to be 9x. Now replace that middle term with an 8x and an x, and then factor by grouping. So I'm going to pull out a 2x from this, leaving x plus 4. And then I'm going to pull out nothing from the second one. I'll pull out a 1, I guess. And then you can pull out the x plus 4 quantity from both. And you'll have left over the 2x plus, there's a 1 right here. Okay, so that's another way to factor that we learned, factor by grouping. In which case that's still equal to 0, and you can get the same two solutions, negative 1/2 and negative 4. All right. We also can solve by extracting square roots. So the book shows you this. It says that u squared equals d, where d is greater than 0, has two solutions, the positive and the negative. So let's put that into practice here with some of these. If I was going to do the first one, the first thing we're going to do is divide both of these by 4. And that gives me x squared equals 3. Now I'd square root both sides, and I'd get x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. So you got to have the plus or the minus. Now you take the square root of both sides of an equation. Don't forget the plus or the minus. So I could also square root both sides of this equation, and you get x minus 3 equals plus or minus 7. And then I could add 3 to both sides, and that gives me my solution of 3 plus or minus 7, square root of 7. So you can pause these and try these on your own and rewind if I went too fast. But this is all stuff that you guys learned from last year. Actually, I think you might have even did this in Algebra 1. So you've been doing this for a while now. This should have been a square root of 7 right here. Sorry, I was going a little fast. All right, so, well, let's try another one. Let's solve by completing the square roots in another method. It actually is the same as the quadratic formula. I can prove the quadratic formula to you by completing the square on this polynomial, which I'm not going to do right now because it'll take too much time. But if you complete the square on this, you get this. Okay? So anyways, let's do that. Let's complete the square on this polynomial. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add 6 to both sides. You get x squared plus 2x equals 6. And now what you do to complete the square is you add something to both sides. And that thing that you add is b over 2 squared. So you have to make sure that you move the constant over the other side. So you have just the two x terms, x squared and the x term. You want to make sure that a is 1. So you have a 1 in front of the x squared here. And if you don't, you divide through to get a. A is 1. And then you add b over 2 squared to both sides. So in this case, b is 2, so I'm going to add 2 over 2 squared to both sides, which is just 1. I'm going to leave it as 1 squared. And then our side, obviously that's just 1, so I have to add it to both sides. The reason I always leave this is because later I'll show you it makes it a little bit easier to, this is now a perfect square trinomial, and so you make it x plus 1 squared. So you take this and put it here, you take this and put it here. For 1, it happens to be the same. 1 squared is 1, so it doesn't matter. But in the future, that might be, you know, like 3/2 or something, in which case it does matter. So this is my factorization now, and that equals 7. And now I can solve this just like I did the last problem where I square root both sides. That gives me x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 7. Subtract 1 from both sides, and I get my two answers, which is x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of 7. Okay? So I've got -1 plus the square root of 7, and -1 minus the square root of 7 is my two answers. All right. Here's some steps for completing the square. It says when solving quadratic equations, we want to add b over 2 squared to each sides. We have to do it to each side to maintain the equality. And keep in mind that the leading coefficient is not 1. You have to divide, like I said. So we'll do some more practice problems, and we'll record some of these in the homework help video. That will be helpful. Okay? All right. So lastly is the quadratic formula. It comes from completing the square on the standard polynomial here. You will get this. I don't have enough time to put it in this video. We can do that later if you'd like. But one thing that's important to know about the quadratic formula is the discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac, and it comes from right here. Underneath this square root, obviously, we can't have negative numbers. It makes sense. If we have a negative number underneath this radical, then we have imaginary numbers. Okay? And if we have a 0 underneath this radical, then we only have one solution. So if b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, then obviously this whole term drops out, and I just get one solution for my x to solve this equation. So obviously if b squared minus 4ac equals 0, there's one solution. Right? So right from the quadratic formula, you know what the discriminant tells you. And then obviously if this right here were negative, if b squared minus 4ac is negative, then there's no solutions. No real solutions, because we'd have an imaginary square root of a negative number. And then lastly, if this were positive underneath the square root, so if b squared minus 4ac is positive, then that means that there's two solutions. Because we have a number here, so you're going to do plus or minus to that number, and there will be two solutions. So it's not hard to remember what the discriminant means right from the quadratic formula. Just look at the quadratic formula and you'll know what it tells us. Let's try an example of the quadratic formula now. So I'm going to put this in standard form and make it x squared plus 3x minus 9 equals 0. And the quadratic formula, write it down as b squared minus square root, b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, opposite of b. Wow, struggling. Okay, so that'd be -3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times a is 1, c is -9, all over 2 times a is 1. Okay, now I can simplify this. Double negatives go positive, so both these negative signs are going to go positive. 4 times 9 is 36, plus 9 is 45. So this is going to be 45 underneath here. I want to simplify the square root of 45. I'm going to make it, let's see, is there a perfect square that comes out of 45? Yeah, let's make it 9 times 5. So the square root of 9 is 3, so it's -3 plus or minus square root of 9 is 3, so 3 square root of 5 all over 2. So there's my two answers. All right, which is -3/2 plus or minus 3/2 times the square root of 5. I guess you could rewrite it as those are my two answers as fractions. I know that's you could turn these into decimals as well, but I like fractions. That's fine. Let's try one application problem. Let's say we have a bedroom that's 3 feet longer than it is wide and has an area of 154. Find the dimensions of the room. All right. So we know that that it is 3 feet longer than it is wide. So the length equals the width plus 3 is one of our equations. And we also know that it has an area of 154. Find the dimensions of the room. Well, we can write two equations from this. We know the area is length times width. So from there we have two equations with two variables. And we can substitute L in for L. We get W plus 3 times W equals 154, which just creates a quadratic for us. All right. This is W squared plus 3W minus 154 equals 0 if I move the 154 to the other side and distribute. And we can solve this with the quadratic formula. We can solve it by completing the square. We can try to solve it by factoring. I can tell you this is not going to factor. Factoring rarely happens in real world scenarios. It's going to happen in the specific homework problems that I put for you, but most of the time we're not going to be able to factor. So let's actually solve this one a different way with our calculator. Let's go ahead and plug this polynomial into our calculator. W squared, we'll use x, plus 3x minus 154. And we're going to graph this. Clearly, the solution that we're looking for is where it's 0, which looks like about right here. So let's just do second calculate 0. And it's asking for a left bound and a right bound. Well, my x cursor is at 5 right now, and my y is at negative 144. So my point is way down here somewhere. Let's hit enter, that's fine. Unless we got to choose the right bound then, so the right side is 0. So let's wait till we see our cursor. There it is. Now I can choose the right side of that 0, hit enter, enter for the third time, and it gives me the zeros at 11. So that means width is equal to 11 to get the dimensions for this room. All right, which the length then, if the width is 11, go ahead and plug that in. The length would be 14. So here's the answer that I'm looking for. Width is 11, length is 14.